Before the Reformation completely tore Europe apart, there was this massive intellectual and cultural revolution already bubbling up. We're talking about the 14th and 15th centuries, a time when the very way people thought about God, about humanity, and about their world was changing, and changing dramatically. So let's dive into how the seeds of this incredible change were first planted. This quote from Pico della Mirandola, it just perfectly nails the new spirit of the age, doesn't it? It's this vision of humanity as powerful, creative, able to forge its own destiny. Now, this was a huge, huge break from the medieval mindset, and it was about to have some pretty profound consequences. So, as the Middle Ages were winding down, you get this great split in Western thought. And it's not a physical border on a map, but a deep intellectual divide. It really created two completely different ways of seeing the world. On one side, you've got the establishment, right? The world of scholasticism, this incredibly intricate, complex theology being taught in all the universities. But on the other side, there's this new movement picking up steam, one that started looking way back to the glories of ancient Greece and Rome for answers. We're going to start with that first path, the old one. Okay, so this first path, late scholastic theology, had become this unbelievably dense and complicated system. For a lot of people, it really felt less like a clearer path to God and more like getting lost in some kind of intellectual maze. And this question right here, it perfectly shows you the problem. Theologians were getting tangled up in these super subtle, abstract questions. And hey, maybe that's fun for a few scholars. But for the average person, it made faith feel like some academic puzzle, totally disconnected from their real lives, their need for comfort, for guidance, for salvation. You had thinkers like John Duns Scotus, nicknamed the Subtle Doctor, who developed this highly technical jargon. Theology was basically becoming an exclusive club, an academic game that was almost impossible for anyone outside this tiny circle of scholars to even understand. Okay, so one of their key, but really tricky ideas was this distinction between God's absolute and ordered power. They argued that God's absolute power has no limits at all. It's not even bound by human logic or our ideas of good and evil. But, they said, God chooses to act in an ordered, reasonable way in our world, playing by rules that God himself set up. So, what's the takeaway? Well, if God's actions are what define what's good and reasonable, then our own human reason can't really prove religious truths anymore. Those old arguments that tried to show faith was reasonable were starting to fall apart. The only thing left was just pure, unquestioning faith and authority. And you can feel the backlash in this quote from the incredibly popular book, The Imitation of Christ. People were just getting tired of all this complex academic talk. They were hungry for a simpler, more personal faith, one that was all about living a good life, not about winning some abstract philosophical debate. All right, let's switch gears and look at that second path. Because while all this scholasticism was kind of turning inward, another movement was absolutely exploding outward. It was looking to the past to build a brilliant new future. And this, of course, was the Renaissance. The word itself tells you everything you need to know. It's French for rebirth. The people who were part of this movement literally saw the 1,000 years before them as just a Middle Age. Some dark, barbaric gap between the perfection of ancient Rome and their own time. Their whole goal was a rebirth of classical art, literature, and thought. And then two key events happened that just poured gasoline on this fire. First, Gutenberg's printing press made it possible to share ancient texts and new ideas faster than ever before. Then, when Constantinople fell, Greek scholars fled to Italy, and they brought with them this incredible treasure trove of classical manuscripts that Europe had lost for centuries. If you had to pick one person to embody this new spirit, it's got to be Leonardo da Vinci. The guy wasn't just an artist. He was an inventor, a scientist, and an engineer. He was the Renaissance ideal of the universal man, this idea that human potential was absolutely limitless, that one person could master any field they wanted. And you can literally see this new vision of humanity in the art. Just look at Michelangelo's Adam on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. This isn't the frail, sinful Adam from medieval art. No way. This is a powerful, muscular, creative being getting that divine spark directly from God. It's a total celebration of human splendor. This new focus on ancient texts also created brand new ways of doing scholarship. Take Lorenzo Valla. He was working for the Pope himself, and he used his skills in language and history to prove that the donation of Constantine, a document that had been used for centuries to justify papal power, was a complete and total fake. The ground was really starting to shake under some of these old institutions. So what happens when this Renaissance spirit, this love of glory, of power, of art, of wealth, takes over the very heart of the church itself? Well, this is where things get really, really explosive. The popes of this era, let's just say they were acting a lot more like secular princes than spiritual shepherds. Their main ambition was to make Rome the most magnificent city on earth, the center of art, learning, and political power. Spiritual duties? Yeah, those often took a back seat to these huge, worldly projects. I mean, the crisis in leadership was just staggering. You had Sixtus IV, who basically bought the papacy and ran the church like a family business for his nephews. Then there was Innocent VIII, the first pope to openly acknowledge his illegitimate kids and shower them with honors. And you can't forget Julius II, the warrior pope, who was way more interested in being Julius Caesar than being St. Peter. But the absolute low point, the poster child for all of this moral decay, was Alexander VI from the notorious Borgia family. This quote from someone writing at the time is just, it's chilling. The feeling was that absolutely everything was for sale in Rome, even salvation. The idea that the Pope had bought his job and therefore had the right to sell off its holy functions, it just shows you how deep the cynicism and corruption had really become. Okay, so let's pull all these threads together. You've got a theology that most people can't even understand. You have a growing hunger for a simple personal faith. And you have a church leadership that is spectacularly and very publicly corrupt. The stage is absolutely set for a massive confrontation. And the symbol of this entire era, of all its ambition and all its problems, was one single magnificent project: rebuilding St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. It was meant to be the ultimate expression of Renaissance glory and papal power, the grandest church in all of Christendom. But a project that massive needed a massive amount of money. So to get the funds, Pope Leo X authorized a special, widespread sale of indulgences. And this one, very practical fundraising decision, well, it would turn out to be the spark that lit the fuse of the Reformation. And that leaves us with one final crucial question. The Renaissance was a celebration of human potential and glory. But when that ambition becomes the main goal of the church itself, what space is left for things like humility, piety, and actual faith? The answer was about to tear a continent apart.